octopuses are really kind of having a moment. People that are like octopus people now, they've got their octopus t-shirt and their octopus earring.
Is there going to be a film adaptation?
So here is the back of the director's chair from the set. And here
So
is my
cool.
copy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ahilya Bamroo. I am a content creator on Instagram where I make funny skits and I do accents and this kind of stuff. And I'm now an actor as well. And today I'm super excited to be speaking to Shelby Van Pelt, who is the author of Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is the Nod Book Club's book of the month. And it was a book that I thoroughly enjoyed reading. If I can kind of summarize it, I would say that it's the most wholesome and light-hearted take on grief I have ever read. I had a really wonderful time exploring the themes in the book without feeling that kind of somber, heavy feeling you sometimes feel when you read about grief. If I was going to give my summary about it, it's a story that is about the intersection of three very different and interesting characters. One who's Tova, who's an elderly woman who lost her son many decades ago. Cameron, also a lost young man, search of purpose and in search of family. And our star of the show, who is Marcellus, a giant Pacific octopus who is sassy but also deeply caring. So yeah, that's enough about what I think. What about yeah? So introduce yourself, Shelby. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, okay, I just have to say, Ahilia, that was a fantastic description of the book. Can I hire you to write my blurb for my next book? Because that's
Anytime.
funny. It's always one of those things that you struggle with. You write this whole novel, and then when you're gonna, pitch it to agents or editors or whatever, you've got to have like the elevator pitch, and sometimes that's harder than writing the book itself. But you did a great job. Anyway, I'm Shelby Van Pelt, obviously author of Remarkably Bright Creatures. Super excited to be here for this conversation.
Perfect. So let's get straight into it. I read that Remarkably Bright Creatures was a pandemic project that you kind of took on. So tell us a little bit about how it started or the idea for this book to start writing it.
Well, it was a book that I would say I finally finished it during the pandemic. I had started it many years before, and I'm a self-taught writer. Like I didn't go to an MFA program, or I wasn't even an English major in college. I had this whole career in consulting before I did any kind of writing or fiction writing, and was really having my own kind of like 30-year-old crisis where I'd been in this career for like a decade, and it really wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I was burned out and stressed and needed a break. So I was taking some time off from that when I decided to explore the idea of writing fiction. And I didn't really know what to write about. I was spending a lot of time sort of just looking for ideas in the world around me, like eavesdropping on people in the grocery store line and trying to make them into characters, to imagine what their stories would be. Um, and so I somehow one afternoon, when I was sort of in that mindset of like looking for stories in the wild, I went down this rabbit hole on YouTube, about it was an octopus rabbit hole. Some of you may have been down it if you've read the book and then gone off and Googled like, can an octopus really escape from, a tiny space, or can they really, walk out of water, spend time out of water? Um, and you end up down this rabbit hole, and it's just fascinating. I mean, this was probably like 10 plus years ago, so there wasn't even the same kind of content that there is really now. But, I was just fascinated, and I remember thinking to myself, like, that's the story that I want to write. This octopus character, I could really make a fun character out of that. Um, so I sort of started this project. I started creating this character. I picked it up and put it down many, many times over the years. I had my kids, so I spent a lot of years just, kind of in parenting mode with young children. Um, but when it was really actually it was lucky timing. It was in the fall of 2019, so actually pre-COVID. My youngest son had started preschool, and I had this sort of reckoning with myself of, hey, if I'm going to write this book, I really need to just finish it and just make myself do it. And so I set up this sort of accountability schedule with one of my writing buddies, and we decided we were going to go for it. We decided that 2020 was going to be like our best year ever. um, and so when COVID came crashing down in March of the following year, I had a pretty good like schedule going and a pretty good routine going for the first time really ever as a writer. And so I think that really helped me, fuel the motivation to continue with this big project um, during a time when obviously with young kids, it was like the worst time to be trying to finish a book. During the pandemic, I had no time to myself. I never had an empty house. We were all kind of stressed and worried, and you just kind of didn't know what the future was going to bring. But I think that also brought some urgency to it. And not to sound like too dramatic about it, like, oh my God, we might not wake up tomorrow, so let's seize the day. But I think there was a little element of, hey, you're not guaranteed this, you know, this capacity to do this, or this life that just kind of keeps rolling along as normal. Like things like pandemics can happen and really throw the chaos. And so if you can do it now, like do it now. And so yeah, I finished it probably about the last maybe like 60% of the book was drafted during that kind of spring and summer of 2020. And I finished it that August and sent it off to agents. And by that fall, I had an agent. And by the following spring, I had a publishing deal. So it all happened really, really fast once I started putting it out there.
That's amazing. I think the pandemic for a lot of us was sort of this time where we were going to explore different creative avenues in general. Like I remember I was kombucha making, which is very different to writing a best-selling novel, but I was definitely trying out things. So I think it was like also a time to really um, just synthesize all your focus into one thing. And you said that
Yeah.
you had researched a lot about octopuses. So I wanted to actually ask when writing about or having an animal narrator, what are the kind of things that you have to keep in mind when you're writing from his point of view? If there is anything that you keep in mind, or what are the sort of like genre conventions that you either want to stick to or that you try to move away from when writing this particular book or writing from Marcellus's point of view?
Well, with Marcellus, being a giant Pacific octopus, I had kind of two different um, spheres in which I thought about how to make him feel real. And the first one was really a very science-driven process. I wanted everything that Marcellus was doing in his physical world to be possible. So, from escaping his tank, from going and like eating the other exhibits in the aquarium. Octopuses really do this in the real world. To even, down to like kind of like forming bonds and friendships with specific people. I wanted all of that to be rooted in science and to be, something that would be physically possible for an octopus to do. So when it came to his movements through his actual world. I spent a lot of time, thinking, could an octopus do this? I remember having some very weird conversations with some folks that I had been, put in touch with. And again, this was like during COVID, so all this is over email and the phone. Just like, could an octopus do this? I remember one was, could an octopus operate a copy machine, like a photocopy machine? It was like, no, that's too far. You need to walk that back. Um, but, in terms of everything that's happening in Marcellus's mind, his inner monologue, his little diary entries that, are scattered throughout the book, was really, I want to say it was more like a traditional literary exercise in terms of, the point of view and the voice, really, like the language that he would use. Whenever I write a character, I have this. The sort of box that I have to put them in terms of what is this person's voice. And, even if they're not speaking out loud, when you're writing in third person, the narration carries that character's voice too. What kind of language would they use? What kind of metaphors would they employ? What would is their reaction to things sort of short and brusque, or is it long and meditative? Um, and so for Marcellus, being that he was an octopus was, obviously a little bit of a challenge because his world is a little bit limited. His his vocabulary, so to speak, is going to be limited to what he has seen and experienced, within the walls of that aquarium, excepting a very short time when he was young. So, in that way, it was just more like writing any other character. Although this one was just a little bit weird in terms of what his his experiences would have been that would contribute to his voice. Um, but yeah, it was a process that required often a lot of just being really intentional with my words. I would always say that Marcellus's sections were the most fun to write by far, but they were also the slowest for me to write because I had to kind of stop and think, would he know this? How would he react to this given his sort of worldview? Um, with respect to genre, I honestly I think this is one of the things about writing a first novel as someone who's not trained as a writer. Like, I just wasn't really thinking about it. I mean, obviously, I'm a big reader, so I'm familiar with, different genres. I knew what a mystery
Fate,
was and a
Charlotte's
romance.
Web. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I wasn't really thinking when I was drafting it, like, what genre is this or where is it going to sit on the shelf? Um, and there's a real freedom in that, I think. And I feel like I'm experiencing it a little bit from the other end now as I try to write more books. And it's like, oh, I know how this works now. you know, this book has to have it. I wouldn't say it has to have a genre, but it has to have when they're going to market a book, they have to be able to say like, what are comparable titles? Where does this, how do booksellers sort of sell this? Um, and so it's hard to I try to separate those things out of my head when I'm drafting because I don't think they're helpful when you're trying to just come up with a story to think of, the genre, um, or the marketing bits. But I have writer friends who do write more strictly within genre, like, hey, I'm a romance writer, or I'm a mystery writer, or a thriller writer, and a lot of times those do have like more, consistent kind of plot beats and tropes that they use. So it can happen either way. But I think for me as a writer, I try to think about it as little as possible when I'm writing.
That's no, that's super inspiring as well. And I think what you said about because it was your first time, it wasn't something that you were trying to keep in mind. I think it really gave you the freedom to, I mean, because Marcellus's voice is actually, in my opinion, super unique. And I love just reading the sort of point of view on humanity from another species. Because there's something so simple and profound about like his observations about people and how they behave and the relationships that people have and how an octopus would see those things in a in from just outside, not being human. And so I think that that was like a really powerful way to speak about what it is to be a human, but speak about it from a point of view that is not human. So yeah,
Yeah.
I really actually enjoyed Marcellus's chapters so much to read them.
On that point, I always find it interesting. I mean, obviously, he's not human. His human sort of analog would be almost like a grouchy old man, like he's just kind of this, and this wise kind of knowing, old, elderly, lived voice. Um, but when I reflect on writing him and his character, Marcellus actually I think came a lot from like my toddler, who was around constantly during the pandemic when I was doing a lot of this. And just, this sort of childlike, almost sense of wonder or just sense of like questioning everything. Why, from my toddler's perspective, it would be, why do you grown-ups do this? Why do you grown-ups say this? This doesn't make any sense. And then you take a moment to reflect and you're like, you're right, it doesn't make sense. We just do it because we do it, because that's what humans do. We don't always
Yeah.
behave in ways that make sense. So I think I
No.
did infuse Marcellus with a lot of that kind of toddler, constant asking of questions and curiosity.
No, yeah, you can definitely tell that it's you've thought about these things also yourself, these sort of questions that he asks about the characters. Um, so speaking about like all of these different chapters, each character has this distinct voice, as you said. Do you feel like there was any character that you identified personally with the most of the three that you spoke about, like about either Tova or Cameron or Marcellus? Like who did you identify with the most?
Okay. I mean, I think I identify with all of them, to be honest. The character of Tova, who is this 70-something-year-old woman who is the really the main character of the story. She came a lot from my grandmother. On my mom's side, my family's all from Sweden, and so my grandma Anna was like my Swedish grandma growing up. And I was very close to her. I lived right next door, and I spent almost every day with her. She was like definitely a part of our everyday family. And so I think on a more surface level, I just infused Tova with a lot of her mannerisms, her worldview. She has this sort of, Scandinavian, like Swedish stoicism, where it's like you don't wear your feelings on your sleeve. You don't, show your emotions. You just kind of like put your head down and work hard. And, it's a little bit detached, the culture there. Um, and so I brought a lot of that into Tova. And, I think I also, having grown up in that culture, I think that I am a little bit that too. The things that Tova struggles with, are really, allowing herself to be vulnerable, letting people help her, sort of letting people in. She keeps everyone sort of at arm's length because that's what's most comfortable. And I am 100% also a person who does that. And it's something that I'm working on, because that's, especially when you get into middle age and you look around and you're like, my gosh, like I miss like the friendships of my college years, of my youth. And, in order to have that, you have to be able to put your guard down and make yourself vulnerable. And I think that's something that a lot of people, in my sort of generation struggle with too. So I definitely identify with Tova a lot. I think the apple does not fall far from the tree, as we would say. And Marcellus would say, "What are you talking about? Why why don't you just use normal why all the metaphors, lady?" Um, so yeah, so Tova I think I definitely identify with. Cameron was an interesting character to write.
Mhm.
Cameron
You
actually
did it
started.
so well.
Oh,
Because I was just
thanks.
thinking, this is like a 30-year-old boy who's just
Yeah.
kind of like, and he talks in a very specific way. And I was just thinking that, like, you got his voice so spot on. Because as I was reading him, he was so well, like, he spoke exactly like he would speak, you know?
Well, I feel like
If,
we've all known this guy.
yeah, we've all known a Cameron
Um,
for sure.
And, and it's not always a guy. I mean, I think it often is. I think I've, like, a lot of us have dated this guy, or, just like this is a guy in your friend group or in your family who kind of just is really struggling with growing up, and you want to kind of just shake him and say, like, get yourself together. And they struggle with that. And, I would have said when I was writing it, that this character was nothing like me and this is just all fiction and whatever, but I think I did put some of myself into him. Some of my kind of early 20s, like struggling to become a full adult, and dealing with bank accounts and respond bills, and just I think I had some growing pains there. And I probably still do in some ways, but I think I did sort of capture for me some of those growing pains through him. And really just wanted him to be sort of that archetype of the person that we love so much that we wish would love themselves as much as we love them. And give that character a chance at sort of redemption throughout the arc of the story. And then Marcellus, I feel like, I don't know, I must have been a grumpy old man in a prior life, because like that part of it, like the voice just came so naturally to me. Like I could for sure just sit in an armchair all day and give opinions about things that no
Yeah,
one
I think
asked
a lot
for.
of us could. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely something I love doing as well. As I was reading, like from Cameron's point of view, one thing that I feel like as a 20-something-year-old that I go through is my friends having children or getting married and those kinds of things, and how it kind of hits you when you're not that far away from being in school in a sense. Like you can still remember it, but on the other hand, you've got friends and peers and people around you that are living such adult lives, such
Yeah.
grown-up things to do and playing house. And something about that transition of life can feel so overwhelming. And I think identified with that personally as well. Like I know that I sometimes I'm just like, weren't we just like figuring out, how we were going to skip class or how we were going to figure out how to do our homework. And now, like, we're figuring out what kind of, you know, names we're going to name our children. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's
No, it's
crazy.
wild. It's wild. And
Yeah.
I remember that vividly too. I mean, I had my kids a little bit later. I was in my mid-30s before I had kids. And so I definitely was also the person sort of watching this happen and being like, wait, what? Like, weren't we just out at a party, like doing things that we would not want our kids doing? Like,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
it's I don't know. I'm 45 and I still feel that way sometimes. My kids are 11 and 9, and there's days when I wake up and I'm just like, I'm the one in charge here. Like, how did this happen?
Yeah. Yeah, that is really crazy when you think about it. Also, so going back to kind of the themes of the book, um, as I said before, I found it was it was profound, but also a joyous take on grief, if I could say that. And obviously, this is something that is quite a delicate topic. It um, is something that pretty much everybody is going to go through or has been through in some way, form in their life. So it's kind of a universal feeling. Um, so what was your approach to writing a story about grief? Like, what was the kind of things that you wanted to infuse into the story so as to not make it either too heavy but also to give it the sort of respect that a topic like this requires?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right that it is something that everyone goes through. I think daily. Real, I mean, I love thinking of grief as, sort of an expanded definition of it beyond just, this is what happens when you lose a pet or when someone dies. I think, grief is really. We grieve smaller things too. We grieve, opportunities that we can't take. We grieve we grieve roads not taken, we grieve all sorts of things. And so, I did want to sort of bring that, all of the characters in the book are experiencing, various sorts of grief. Some the more, traditional, what we think of, like, Tova lost her son, so she's grieving for him, obviously. Um, but also those sort of like smaller everyday things that we grieve. Um, I knew I wanted to write a funny book, and a kind of lighthearted book, mostly because those are the books that I enjoy reading most. Some of my favorite authors are just masterful at taking on these heavy, some sad, uh, y- uh, difficult subjects and writing about them in ways that are just entertaining and funny, and treat the matter with respect, but still like are able to wrap it up in levity and make a fun story to read. So I think that's sort of what I was aiming for. I'm glad that it sort of worked.
Yes, no, it definitely landed. I think I was like laughing and also just feeling really good and warm about the whole sort of series of events. And I also identified, I guess, as we said, it's sort of this universal feeling, grief. And I remember somebody telling me, somebody who lost a parent, who said that for you, it's every single day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Whereas for everybody else around you, they might, move on from your grief. But for you, it's something that from the day it happens, kind of you carry it with you, some part of you. You don't learn to forget it, you learn to live with it. And so I
Yeah,
thought that that was
no.
like a big sort of learning that I had about grief. And so it was so nice to just read this book that felt like a warm hug about grief, if that makes sense.
Well, you have, in Tova, this character, particularly the grief that she carries with her over, her loss of her son, which had been 30 years before. And I think that's exactly right. She has learned to carry it. There's not a day that goes by where she doesn't think of it, but she moves through her life with it. Um, and I've often thought, like, what is her story arc? Um, and as you think about that as writers, you've got to have, even I knew that as an untrained writer when I was writing, like, there's got to be a character arc, right? Um, but and it was tempting sometimes to let her story arc rely too much on this idea of, oh, well, she's got to get over it. She's got to get over this thing with her son. She's carrying it around and it's making her too heavy. And, you know, um, you never get over it, obviously. So that, I had to really resist writing into that kind of trap. But I think you do carry it with you and you do get stronger. So I kept, trying to remind myself, okay, like, what she needs to do is learn how to make herself stronger so that she can carry this and it's not weighing upon her quite so much. And, so how is she going to get stronger? Well, a big part of it is she's going to learn to open up to her community and to let her friends in and to not try to just do it all by herself, which is what she's been doing for the last 30 years. Um, and I think that does sort of resonate with how we deal with grief in the real world. I mean, if you try to just like lock it inside you and carry it all by yourself all the time, like that doesn't usually work for most people. So, yeah, it's definitely a tough thing to write about. And, I've had people come up to me at book events and be like, have you lost a child? Which I'm always like, okay, that's a question to ask in a signing line.
Yeah.
And I haven't. Um, but I tried my hardest as, as a writer of fiction, we try to put ourselves in these shoes and do it justice as best we can. And so I gave it my all.
No, and it was a beautiful read for sure. And also what you spoke about when you said there's something about the community that has to come together in supporting people who've been through, loss in any ways. And Soul? Is it Soul? Do you pronounce it like
So,
that?
yeah.
Soul. So Soul Bay. So I come from a little town called Oroville, and there were so many parallels for me while I was reading it because there's this sort of familiarity. There's a town gossip that everyone has secrets that the other person knows, and we have this sort of like, yeah, it's just a very intricate network of people and webs of relations here and there. And so I wanted to know about what gave you the inspiration about writing about Soul Bay. Do you also come from a small town? What was the kind of reason to write about like a small town life also?
I just love writing small towns for all of those reasons that you just went. I mean, the connections are so much tighter. The tension, when we write fiction, we're always, okay, where's the tension? Where's the tension? There's got to be tension in a book, otherwise it feels flat. And when you set a story in a small town, you sort of automatically get some tension, right? Because
Yeah.
there are always going to be the secrets and the gossiping and just those really almost like claustrophobic um, connections between people. But I come from Tacoma, Washington, which is not really a small town. I was actually just there yesterday. We had a family reunion, and I flew back last night. But it's a much larger town than Solo Bay. But there are, in Washington State, in so this is like the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., which is the very top corner on the northwest side, and the the Puget Sound or Salish Sea, as we call it, the body of water just kind of like snakes its way into the region. And there are so many little towns on the water. And growing up in that area, Tacoma's maybe 30 minutes away from a lot of these towns. But that was where we went, on vacation or just like, driving around. I had, friends and relatives who lived in these towns. So I feel like I did spend a lot of time in them, even though the town that I lived in was larger. Um, but yeah, I loved the idea. I always knew it was gonna be a small town book because I wanted that tension, particularly, with the character of Tova, who very much values her privacy,
Mhm.
to be, in this environment where, it's hard to have privacy in a small town, as I'm sure you know. Word gets around. And I loved the idea of making the town gossip a man. 'Cause I feel like it's so stereotypically is a woman,
Yes,
and I'm like, "Okay,
yes.
it's gonna be a guy." And what better job for him to have than running the only grocery store in town? Because
Mhm.
everyone's gonna go through there at some point, and,
Yes.
he just is perfectly positioned to stand there and chat with everyone, and he just loves it. It suits him so well. Um, so I loved that setup and, the, the plot points that came out of it, sort of like I didn't really plan it kinda just grew out of that setup of Ethan the grocer, the town gossip, being sort of centrally positioned, and I was really pleased to discover how it could influence the plot as well.
And what is the kind of what is the response you most get from people who've read your book? Because as I said, like for me, it was just such a sort of, I felt like it was a warm hug of a book. It also had a very satisfying ending for me. Like personally, I just felt like everything clicked. And along the way, as I was reading it, I also felt like pieces of the puzzle were coming to me sort of a little bit before they would present itself in the book. And I liked that. I liked the pace of like, I think this is what's happening. And then it happened. And then it went like that. And then everything just clicked into place. So I really like that. But what's the sort of reaction that readers have? And what was the most unexpected response you ever got from a reader who read your book?
Oh my gosh. Well, a lot of people have used the word hug. That
Yeah.
it feels like, either the book is giving you a hug or like you want to give it a hug, which is so awesome. I mean, that is, uh, you know, I feel like never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined I would be, I mean, thought I might finish a book, but for it to reach so many people who have, that reaction, which is just so kind of personal and it's just incredible feeling. I still feel like, we're a few years into this and I'm like, how did I do that? How is this my life? Um, the most unexpected reaction. I've had a few folks come through. Well, I should say I have had a lot of people, um, and sometimes if I'm at a book club or giving a book talk, I'll even ask for a show of hands in the audience and say, "Raise your hand if you picked this book up because there was an octopus and you were like, I love octopuses. Yay, it's on the cover." Um, and it's about half of the group that will raise their hand. And then I say, "Okay, raise your hand if you were like, an octopus? Really? I don't know." But then you read it and hopefully enjoyed it anyway. And it's like it's like 50-50. So I think it's really funny to have won over a lot of octopus skeptics.
Octopus
Um,
skeptics. That's a way to
I
put it.
have or just I mean, maybe they're not even specifically octopus. I mean, I'll have people who will say, like, "I just I don't read books that have an animal narrator, like, it's not my
Yeah.
thing."
Or like the
Or,
magical realism of it. Yeah.
right, I don't read fantasy. Um, and, I don't know if maybe some of that goes back to the fact that, I didn't think of myself as writing a fantasy when I was writing it, I just was writing a book. Um, but yeah, the number of octopus skeptics that have been won over is pretty fun. The the people that, like, are, like, octopus people now that they've read the book, I've met
Yeah.
a lot of those people who are like, "I'm just obsessed now," and, like, they've got their octopus t-shirt and their octopus earrings, and, octopuses are really kind of having a moment in, like,
There was
culture.
also like this
So,
Netflix documentary or a film which was called My
yeah,
Octopus Teacher, and it was like a really beautiful sort of film about again the relationship between an octopus and a person and how intelligent they are. So I think it's
yeah,
definitely like something that people are learning more about these days, that how they're so much more intelligent than we give them credit for. They're
yeah,
remarkably bright creatures.
they
Yeah.
are, turns out.
Yeah.
No, it's been really, really fun to be, like, a part of that movement, even a small part.
Okay, so one question I think a lot of readers probably have is that is there going to be a film adaptation
There
of
is.
Remarkably Bright Creatures? Oh,
There is. I have to show you this.
okay.
Yeah. So here is the back of the director's
Ah,
chair from the set, and here
so
is my
cool.
copy.
Yay.
They let
Honestly,
me they let me keep it.
that's amazing. And as I was reading it, I was also imagining how it would make for such a lovely film. So I think we're all going to be super excited about s- just watching it now after reading it. And so what was that process
Yeah.
like to sort of have it visually come to life?
Well, I mean, I guess it's a long process, obviously.
Hmm.
I've learned all of this, going through it. I didn't know how does a book get to be a movie? Well, first they option it. So we actually we sold the option pretty quickly after the book was published, when it first came out in hardcover back in 2022. Um, and we had a great producer on board, but of course, like, that's just like the first step. And, most popular books get optioned. Most of them don't actually get made into movies. So, that was exciting, but kind of like, okay, I know we have a long road ahead because you've got to find someone to fund it really next and actually, put up the money and the resources to make it. So, we sold the option. Some time went by. We had a big strike here in the U.S. The writers and actors went on strike for about 9 months, which really took about a year out of everyone's contract, all told, because all of the contracts have a thing where it pauses if there's something like that that happens. Um, So it was really like 2024, just last year, that finally we started to get some traction. And we ended up getting Netflix to come on board. We got Sally Field to come on board to play Tova. And they actually made it happen pretty quickly once we got to that point. They filmed the film just this past April, April 2025, out in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is just right up the coast from where I grew up. And it's funny because they film a lot of movies in Vancouver. It's kind of one of those places that offers the tax breaks and things. So a lot of movies that you watch that are like, oh, it's supposed to be New York, but it's really like Vancouver, British Columbia. But in the case of this book, it actually fit because it's very similar in terms of the landscape and the weather and all that. So it was just a beautiful film to I only got to watch about a week of the filming, but it was just magical to see these things that were in my head. This these characters that I was sitting at my dining room table, during COVID, like my kids are throwing cereal and I'm like writing these characters and now they're being played by, like award-winning actors and actresses and, have this set of hundreds of people working on bringing it to life. So I think it's going to be a really, really good movie. Sally Field is amazing. She's going to make a great Tova. We have Lewis Pullman is playing Cameron. Cole Meany is a Irish actor who's playing Ethan. And I have to say, just those were the three actors that were on set the week that I was there, and the chemistry between them was just amazing. The chemistry between Sally Field and Cole Meany, so between Tova and Ethan, like they were just amazing together. Lewis Pullman is just like a perfect Cameron. He's just like he's really cute. I was like, I think I have a crush on
I
him.
imagine him to be really charming as well. When I read
Yeah,
the book, I was
yeah.
like, Cameron is like very charming.
But in this kind of like slightly disheveled, like, just the kind of floppy way. I don't know.
Yeah.
He was perfect. They did change. There's a few like plot points that they changed when they adapted it, and I did get to read. I got to read, I think, most of the major versions of the script and like weigh in on those decisions. And I think, to the extent that it departs from the plot a little bit in some ways, just to get it into a movie shape that will fit on your screen and in 120 minutes or less. Um, to the extent that they departed from the plot, I think they did a great job in staying true to the characters. Um, and to me, that's way more important. I mean, the fact that like this scene happens or that scene happens or these things are combined or they skipped something, like whatever, I can deal with that as long as you get the characters right. And I think they really, really did get the characters right. So I am super excited for the film.
Me
I
too.
know
I can't wait. When is
everyone's
it
gonna
coming out?
ask. Yeah, everyone asks that. I don't know. Hopefully we'll have a release date soon, but I don't think we have one yet. My hope is sometime in 2026, but I don't know that for sure. Um, and the other question that everyone always wants to know is who's doing the voice of Marcellus.
Yes.
And we don't know that yet either. It's all voiceover type work. So it's kind of the last thing that they do once they have the film sort of edited and cut, they will lay in Marcellus's voice. So, when I was out on the set, that hadn't been cast yet. Of course, everyone has their favorites and their ideas. I have my favorites and my ideas, but but yeah, we'll see. I'm sure that whoever they get is going to be great. And they actually there's some filming that they did of a real octopus in the aquarium in Vancouver. I think her name was Agatha. So Agatha will be on screen, and then they had a puppet Agatha, like a puppet octopus made that they were sort of dragging around the set with them to be in the shots and stuff so that the actors could have, something that they're talking to. They're not just talking to a blank aquarium. Um, and then I think a lot of it in the final film will obviously be computer generated, kind of digitalized version of that puppet or something like that. So that takes some time to do. So, I'm they can take their time with it, do it right, do it well.
So now I just have like one last question, and I think this is also something that a lot of people would want to know, but it's how you imagine um, their life 5 years after the ending of the book. So what is Tova up to? Cameron finally get a job that was, permanent, and I guess Marcellus either is somewhere frolicking in the ocean or maybe he passed on. But how do you kind of see these characters 5 years down the line?
Yeah, well, I love that, well, so this is a spoiler, obviously, but, so Tova and Cameron kind of find each other and
Oh my
find
God,
their
true. I shouldn't have said, also, I shouldn't have said
Oh,
about Marcellus. I don't know. What was I?
should
Okay,
we?
that can be
Do we
cut
wanna do we
out.
wanna
Or,
back we can backtrack that.
okay.
Yeah, okay, so obviously Tova and Cameron sort of finding each other is a big piece of the missing puzzle for each of them. So, if nothing else, I would absolutely imagine that they, have a beautiful relationship, going forward. And Tova now has someone to sort of help her with all of those things that she was so anxious about. Who is gonna, as I, get older and need to depend on people, who is gonna fill that role? I don't have anyone. Well, now she has Cameron. And she has, her friends. She has sort of a renewed relationship with her friends, whereas before she was really like hesitant to ask them for anything or even like receive their offers of help. Now she has sort of improved on that front. So, yeah, I imagine she's like living her best life in this gorgeous condo, and she's got Ethan is around, and, I don't know if they're like dating or like it's just a really nice like companionship type
Yeah.
friendship.
Mhm.
But they are there for each other, and he loves to come out. I picture he and Cameron coming over to her house and like having like a jam session. And like Tova, is like sort of tolerating it until it gets to be too much, and then she's like, okay, take it out to the porch, like um but secretly is just like really loving having, people around and in her space, even if it makes her bristle a little bit sometimes. Um, yeah, I think Cameron gets a job. I think at the end he's looking to go to school for engineering, which is a perfect fit for his brain. He can do his sort of crazy analytical thing. He'll find a job that can kind of work with him and some of his quirks. He'll figure it out. Um, I the big unresolved question, I think for a lot of people at the end, and for me included, is, what happened with his mother? Like, is she around? Is she alive? Is he ever gonna have a relationship with her? And, so she is very much alive in my mind, the character of Daphne, of course. This is, Cameron's mother, who Tova's son, Eric, had a sort of secret relationship with, before he died. And, in my mind, I think there's still like a chance for her. She's someone who has a lot of things that she struggles with. She struggles with sort of addiction and just like, carrying, this guilt, this grief over what happened. And we talked earlier about like learning how to carry grief. I think that Daphne is someone who is very much on that journey of learning how to do that and be able to move forward with her life without the substances and abuse and learning how to carry the weight of what happened so many years ago in a more productive way. And I think in my mind, like there's a chance for her and Cameron to have a relationship someday. I don't know if it's happened 5 years on, but they're both young, and I have hope for them.
Yeah, me too. And I think
Oh,
like,
Marcellus, we have to talk about I think he
yeah,
died. He has to die. I
he
mean,
has to. He's bound by a certain natural chronology, so
yeah,
it
and
was
that would be
bound to
an
happen.
example of, hey, it's a fantasy book, but like we can't give
You
it
can't.
another 5 years. Like it's yeah, he's already at, the very, very end of what's
Yeah,
possible lifespan
yeah.
wise for an octopus. But the fact that he got to have freedom in his last,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's days or weeks, but in his last moments, he got to experience what he'd always wanted. I think, makes it a happy ending, even though it's a sad fate.
Cool. And there was actually one last thing I just wanted to. Is there any sort of Easter egg symbolism to the Dala horse in your life also?
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see them on. Yeah, you can. They're right up here.
Yeah.
Um, these were my great grandmother's Dala horses. that were
Okay.
passed to my grandmother. My grandmother came as a kid from Sweden, like Tova did, and they brought these with them, and so I grew up with these all around my grandma's house, eventually all around my house. Now they're here, and I remember my kids being toddlers, and these are probably they're pretty old. These are probably from like the I don't know late 1800s, early
They're
1900s.
beautiful. Yeah.
Um, but my kids would want to play with them, and I'd be like, "No, no, you can't play with them. They're super special. They're super old." But then I have to remind myself that these are made to play with. Like that is sort of they're very symbolic in Swedish culture. Um, but they're also like wooden toys that kids play with. So yeah, they're very special. Um, in the book, it sort of symbolizes, this delicate thing that gets broken, but ultimately is able to be put back together. I don't know if the metaphor is like, you can always put it back together. It's never too late. Something like that. That's ham-handed. But yeah, they definitely play, played a role in my, I wouldn't say like a big role. Like it wasn't, but they were just always there. And so it made sense to me that they would be there in Tova's house. And I really wanted them to play, a pivotal plot role in the book as well.
Oh yeah, I was also I didn't know what a Dala horse was, and then I had to do a little bit of
Well,
Googling.
they have
So
they have
yeah,
new ones too.
they're really
Actually, the
beautiful.
isn't that this is like a new one. You can buy
Hmm.
these in I mean, I'm sure you can buy them online, but you can buy them like, in the Stockholm airport, they'll have a shop of these. But this is a really nice one. The folks at Bloomsbury um in the UK actually sent this to me as a gift after publication. So it sits on my
Okay,
other shelf over here. But yeah, they're definitely sort of the quintessential Swedish thing, so it just made sense for them to be in the book.
that's really, really wonderful. Anyways, I'm so happy that we had this conversation, and it's so rare for me to get to meet the author of the book that I just read, or e-meet you at least, and have a conversation and
Yes.
ask you all the burning questions and pick your brain a little bit. So I feel very lucky. So thank you so much for having this chat with me, and I'm so excited for everything that's coming up ahead. Maybe another book. We're excited, perhaps. Hmm,
Yeah,
that would
no,
be
it's in the
cool.
works. It's not finished yet. Like I said, it's been a much different process the second time around, writing. Now I'm writing into people's expectations. It's hard. I
Yeah,
didn't
that's a
when I
very
when I
different ball game. Yeah.
it is. I mean, when I wrote this, I didn't think anyone was going to ever read it, like just most books don't get published, right? So now I'm writing knowing that people are probably going to read it and it's harder, but it's okay. It'll get done.
I'm super excited for that as well, and for the film. So I'm really
Yeah,
looking
well,
forward.
I will definitely share like on my Instagram and socials like any word on the film release date. You'll know as soon as I do. So stay tuned, I guess.
We're all gonna do that. Okay, cool. So yeah, I just want everyone to really go and read this book. And I'm really glad that I don't know, books like this are that are uplifting and not just about kind of the sad state of the world are still coming up. And I think it's important that work is super important to, just like shine a light on the
It is
world.
it's nice to have a little respite from the state of the world sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shelby. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time. It was
Thanks
wonderful
for
to talk
having
to you.
me.
Thank you,
Bye.
non book lovers. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Nod.